Are you new to Clash Royale and have no idea how to play? Do you have any idea what it means when someone clowns on you for overcommitting on a push? You know how to capitalize when your opponent is out of sight? Well, if you don't have any idea what any of this means, you're at the right spot. A few weeks ago, my girlfriend started to play Clash Royale. And let me tell you, she is absolutely terrible. She loses to the bots. She loses to terrible players down in like training camp. It's honestly embarrassing. Every time I try to help her, it just makes it all worse. She'll throw like a mini P.E.K.K.A tool. Every time I try to tell her, don't throw cards into their counters, she looks at me like I'm stupid. I say, make a positive elixir trade. She looks at me like I'm a goddamn alien. I thought about it and I'm like, that actually makes a little bit of sense. If someone hasn't been playing since day one, they're not gonna have any idea what I'm saying. So today I decided to make a beginner's guide on how to get onto the right track in Clash Royale. Even if you have been playing the game for a while, this will be a good refresher on all these terms that you might not hear all the time. So without further ado, here are 14 terms that you have to know to play Clash Royale. The most important part of Clash Royale is your deck. Whatever deck you choose is definitely going to change the way you play the game. The truth is, not all decks are created equal. So here are some terms that you're going to have to know to be a better deck builder in Clash Royale, and to just be a better player overall. The first term is archetype. A deck archetype is basically the basis of a deck. Most of the time you'll hear this, it's like the main win condition of the deck, or like the two main cards of the deck. You'll hear Log Bait, Hog Cycle, Electro Giant, Golem. Anything like that is a deck archetype. It is just the main structure of the deck. That's all that means. The second term that you have to know is cycle. Cycle is basically how fast you can get to the same card in your deck again. Let's say you place the log. You have to play 3 or 4 more cards depending on if you have a champion on the map to get back to your log again. This becomes insanely important when talking about your win conditions and count. When you're playing against log bait, they are trying to outcycle your log. So you need to know how many cards they are away from their goblin barrel and how many cards you are away from your log, because your log has to be in sight. Also becomes important when playing hog cycle. Basically, the player puts a whole bunch of cheap cards inside of their deck to try to spam as many hogs as possible. You need to keep up with their hog cycle with your hog counter. If you can't do this, you lose. The third term you need to know is what a win condition is. A win condition is basically any card your deck is based around for its main deck. The only 2 cards that makes this kind of controversial is the Ice Golem and 3 Musketeers. The Ice Golem goes directly for towers, but then again, it doesn't do enough damage to be the main damage dealer in your deck. The other card that gets kind of controversial with is the 3 Musketeers. The 3 Musketeers don't go directly towards towers, but most of the time, it is the main damage dealer in your deck. For you beginners, this is the Giant. The Giant is the main damage dealer in your deck. It goes directly towards towers. This is a term that you have to use long term because you have to have a win condition in your deck for it to be any good. The fourth term that you have to know is support cards. A support card is basically any card inside of your deck that is not a win condition or a spell. Musketeer, Vault's Firecracker, Barbarians, and Ice Spear. All those cards are support. A support card is basically there to mesh your deck together. Remember, certain support cards are going to work better with certain win conditions. That's just how it works, and please do not try to mix these support cards in with the wrong deck. The fifth term that we're going to talk about is big spell. A big spell is any spell inside of your deck that's not a small spell. We're talking rocket, lightning, poison, fireball, and sometimes even earthquake can be classified as a big spell. A big spell is usually your bigger damage dealer. It can kill troops more often than small spells, and it can sometimes be used as a win condition later in game. It is very important in the beginning and later parts of the game to have these things upgraded. They're very important for you. The sixth term we're going to talk about is small spells. Small spells are your log, your zap, your air, basically any smaller spell that does little damage compared to big spells. Are usually meant to kill swarms and have knockback, which is not typically the point of bigger spells. These spells are insanely. There's no way you're beating a bait deck when you don't have a small spell in your deck. You just stand no chance. Just please do not forget about these. The seventh term we're going to talk about is a hard counter. A hard counter is basically any kind of deck or card that just completely steamrolls your deck. We're talking Road Recruits against an Expo. An Expo player stands 0 chance against a Road Recruits player. This is straight up because Road Recruits, are unstoppable when the other player has Expo. There's no way they win that game. A hard counter is not every single time you lose. You're not losing every single time because of a hard counter. You're just bad. I just had to say. Now that you have some of the basics of deck building terms, we're going to go into some terms that you're going to use when you're actually playing the game. These terms get thrown around by pros, they get thrown around by me, or basically any YouTuber or friend that you have that plays the game. If you don't know these terms, you're never going to get past Challenge or 2 because you probably just suck. First gameplay term we're going to talk about is a counter. Basically, a counter is anything that you have inside of your deck that is going to be used to kill what your opponent has. My counter for your Hog Rider is a mini P.E.K.K.A. I'm going to play the mini P.E.K.K.A. every time you play the Hog Rider, because if I play my mini P.E.K.K.A. correctly, your Hog Rider gets 0 damage every single time. If I can keep my counter, my mini P.E.K.K.A. in cycle against your Hog Rider, you stand 0 chance because my counter is in cycle every single. The second term you need to know is push. Push is basically when you are attacking we're talking, you throw a golem in the back, you have a night witch, healer, all that kind of stuff coming towards your opponent's tower. That is your push. You want to have a big push to kill your opponent's tower. Some decks, pushes are going to look different than others. Like I just explained, the Golem's deck is going to look much bigger than your Hog Cycle. Your Hog Cycle push is throwing the goddamn Hog Rider down. You want to make sure that you can stop your opponent's pushes. That's basically all that term means. Kiting is kind of a niche little thing that you have to learn how to do to be able to stop opponents' pushes with very little. Like, this becomes insanely important if you have an Ice Golem in here. Ice Golems are the king of kite. Basically, to kite, you push your troop one tile to the right of the center to where it goes to the other lane. This will pull troops from one lane and make it follow to the other side. This will make both the towers hit it eventually, and it'll kill it without doing any damage to either one of your towers. This can also work very, 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 very good against air troops, because the air troops usually can see a little bit further than ground troops. This will pull the baby dragon, this will pull minions with it, and the towers are going to have more time to shoot it before they do any damage to the towers themselves. The fourth term that you have to know is elixir trade. An elixir trade is how much elixir you used versus how much elixir your opponent used in a specific interaction. You use a 3 elixir arrows to kill your opponent's 5 elixir minion horde. You made a +2 elixir trade. You want to make as many positive elixir trades as you possibly can, because that will put you at a huge advantage later on in the game. The fifth term that you got to know is elixir lead. An elixir lead is basically all of the elixir trades that you made combined. This also takes into account elixir leak. An elixir leak is how long you were sitting at 10 elixir and how much elixir you lost because you were sitting at 10 elixir, because that is the max elixir you can. So basically, how much elixir you lost through elixir leaking and how much elixir you gained or lost through elixir trades together equals an elixir. An elixir lead at a specific time is insanely important, because if your opponent is up 4 elixir, that means they have 4 more elixir. If they have 8 elixir and you have 4 elixir, they can put a golem down at the bridge, and all you're going to have is a goblin gang, and you stand no chance because it's not going to be able to kill the golem. Some decks, like golem decks or lava hound decks, won't even try to counter certain cards because they want to get an elixir. If a golem player, lava hound player get an elixir lead, you stand 0 chance. They're just going to steam. The sixth term that you have to know is out of cycle. When you are out of cycle, that means that you do not have a counter to one of your opponent's cards. Like I said a while ago, when your opponent throws a goblin barrel at the tower and you don't have a log, that means you're out of cycle. Their goblin barrel is most likely going to get a ton of damage because your log is out of cycle, so you can't. You see this a lot with like buildings when you're playing against Hog Rider or like a mini P.E.K.K.A. or something along those. Basically, when your counter to your opponent's card is not in your hand, when they have it in their hand, you are out of sight. The seventh term that you gotta know is overcommitting. Overcommitting can happen on offense or defense. Overcommitting on defense looks like you throwing a mini P.E.K.K.A, goblin gang, and log at your opponent's Hog Rider coming down. This is a 5 elixir loss when you do this. Your opponent just has to throw an Ice Spirit, Skeletons, and log down, and they're back to the Hog Rider, and they're gonna take your tower. Overcommitting on offense looks like you playing a golem deck, and even after you know you're going to take the tower, you keep on throwing elixir into that previous push. You just save your elixir to either defend your opponent's counter push, or you're going to have to save up to push on the other side. So now you know some of the main terms inside of Clash Royale. Just make sure you're listening to YouTubers or better players, and when they're speaking, you now know what they're trying to say. This is going to just make you a much better player than other new players in the game.